Okay. I'm having a little bit of difficulty trying to communicate. However, I think it's not to do with my lack of skills, okay? It's because the things I want to communicate about are difficult to communicate using the tools that we are accustomed to using. Um, it's like the mode of communication that we have allows us to understand certain things. But there are certain things that just escape us, okay, and it's mainly through the mode of communication. So to give you an instance of this, okay, to give you an example, in our standard mode of communication, best exemplified perhaps by, for example, law courts, where you have somebody pro, somebody against. You know, what is it? The bench, defence, and whatever the word is for the other. Okay, and there's a judge or a jury that have to decide. Okay, so the idea is that you present one side, then you get the other side. This whole dichotomy thing. Okay, and then it's a competition. One wins, one is right, the other one's wrong. This whole notion of, and this is embedded in our logic. Okay, and this is embedded in a deep psychological thing, which kind of evolved out of the Greeks, really, actually. And it's the law of the excluded middle. You're either right or you're wrong. And this is quite deep in our culture, in our psyche in the West. Because of that, we have wars. Because you can't really sort things out if you've got this idea that you're either right or wrong. Because if another person's got a different idea from you, well, they must be wrong, because you've got the right idea, don't you? Do you see? So this, our mode of communication very much depends on various parameters. And these parameters are things as deep as beliefs, values, our understanding of how language works, our understanding of our own experience of our own lives, what we learn at school about history, about the nature of people, man, humanity, animals, our relationship to animals, and so on and so forth. So it's a very complex thing. But effectively it means that when we're talking about stuff, it just predisposes that we talk about certain things, for example, world peace, and we're talking about it, and that our mode of communication defeats us. So we can't actually really talk about it accurately. Do you see? Whoa, okay, that was pretty long. So for example, let me start with, or flick through to the second part of this conversation, which says past thinking and methods did not prevent world wars. Future thinking must prevent wars. That's good. Alright, that's Einstein, New York Times Magazine, 23rd of June, 1946, just after the war. Okay, so it's about preventing. That's pretty good. Prevention. It's not problem solving, it's preventing the problem from arising. Einstein. So, let's propose that if we're going to talk about world peace, for example, we need different methods, methodology, and so on and so forth, and our mode of communication is different. I'm going to call it N++, because there's something amusing about that. And there's a few aspects to it. Okay, it has to be holistic. So you're thinking about the whole problem. You're not thinking about a specific thing. So a lot of people who think about the future think about, for example, economics or politics. And they're not really taking into consideration, for example, the religion and what that means, okay, at least in the West. Or there are a few in the West, and they're thinking about the religious, and about spirit and soul and so on and so forth, and they're not thinking about industry, you know, and the machinery of industry. Or they think about science and technology, and they're not really thinking about fashion. Okay. When of course everything is influencing everything else. Okay. So it has to be holistic. And that doesn't mean that you have to know everything. It just means that you have to be sensitive that whatever it is that you're thinking about, it's incomplete. Okay, in relation to the whole thing. So that's an aspect. I think most people get caught up in being specialists and expertise, when I think future thinking, you've got to be holistic. You've got to think about everybody, everything. You've got to have that kind of thing going on. Okay, it's future orientated. It's not past orientated. We are informed by the past, and that's a good thing. We're actually future oriented. Most people have discussions about the past, but we have to be thinking about the future. Also, we have to distinguish between a human being and the institution which they are in, and which they create with whatever thoughts they have. So you distinguish, for example, Tony Blair, a person, from the institutional system which he and the role that he's playing as Prime Minister. Do you get that? Or any one of us, you know, a teacher from the human being that is just a person that's just happened to be standing there, or a child from the behaviour. Okay, so that's an obvious one of that. Because I would take fault with the institutions. Human beings, I think, are great, but the institutions that we've created historically are not so good, and we have to change those, so we can confront those and alter those. And another little thing that I've got is I'm over here, you're over there. So we've got as far as I'm over here, you're over there. So there's respect between us as we're communicating. So we're all on the same level. And I'm trying to do something directly, consciously communicate. I'm not trying to indirectly influence. And it's basically just simple relationships of individuals, me and my friends. That's it. It's not based on my relationship to, you know, a politician. Not at all. It's just to do with just who you're connected to. Okay? That's another thing about future thinking for me. You're a bod, and you're a bod. And we're separate bods, and you have your own ideas about what's going on in the world, and I've got my own. And we have to somehow communicate across our differences and connect up our similarities. So anyway, so if you get several of these things kind of together, things I've just mentioned, holistic, future-orientated, the difference between human being and doing, or the institutions that we're in, and I'm over here, you're over there. If you have, maybe there's a couple others, okay, we'll call it N++. If you have this way of thinking, and you agree to that operating system, whenever you're communicating, there's probably something about language, using the past tense, present tense, and future tense, that kind of thing, having some awareness about how we work subconsciously. Anyway, it means that when we communicate, or for example, there is no law of excluded middle, so we can both be right. Depends on perspective and so on and so forth. It's like the story about the wise men and they're blindfolded and they have the elephant, and one person's holding the ear and says it's like paper, it's like as thin as paper. Another person's holding the elephant's tail and saying it's like a rope. Another person's touching the trunk or something and saying it's like a snake, and another one's like it's like a tree, and that's its leg. And they're all right. It's just they're only feeling the right different things. So in the same way, I think that, for example, if you're thinking about world peace, I think there's a hell of a lot of right, and we have to get a lot of rights together to make the whole thing right, you know. And we have to try and get accurate regarding this accuracy. And I think what happens is it happens through verification, not falsification. So somebody says something to you about how things are, and you go, okay then, and you trust them, you believe them, you say it's true, and you should be able to check to verify it. What I'm trying to say is that I'm having difficulty communicating, and it's only if other people employ a similar kind of operating system do conversations actually get quite deep. And it means also that we can employ different techniques, like for example I call it reflexive calibration, like for example watching the film Dune and projecting upon it various symbols, and by doing that we can kind of compare and contrast our ideas about how the world is formed and how we can alter it positively. Because what I find is that when we talk about things like oil and so on and so forth, it's too heavy, and it ends up talking about history and so on and so forth, and economics. And we have to kind of liberate it in order to include it within the same influences of the inspiration, for example, of Hollywood and Factory of Dreams and so on and so forth. I don't know if you know about that. You know, and how we are inspired by people and things and ideas. This whole notion of a country, where did that come from? People die for their country, things like that. Whereas before, people didn't really do that.